Welcome to the MetaView podcast. Hear these non-fungible conversations. They will yield you great knowledge and perspective. But beware, they might also make your brain go boom. So watch your step, because this rabbit hole goes deep. Good luck and have fun. Welcome, Hugi, to Meta Radio.
Thank you very much.
And is Hugi the right way to pronounce it?
It is one of the many ways that I accept. So the right way to pronounce it in Icelandic is Hugi, but it tends to get lost in transliteration because, of course, Hugi is the more common one. So yeah, Hugi is fine. We can go with that.
Fair enough. So since you are less well known in Web3, I will add some context just by saying that I was looking for more great speakers from this sort of meta modern game B side of things, and Hansi Freinacht or Daniel Gortz recommended you. So here you are on the podcast. And would you care to share a bit more about yourself?
Sure. So yes, I think Hansi or Daniel and I met through something that at the time was called alter ego. And the idea with that was to try to combine, you could say, spirituality with politics, because I have been involved in really participatory political movements for a very long time, even since I was not even 20 years old. So my start in those participatory movements in general was actually in 2006, when I was a founding member of the Swedish Pirate Party, that has since then become a little bit of a worldwide phenomenon. I was involved with them for the first 2 years of their existence, and I've not really been much since. But the thing that I learned there and the thing that I took away from it was really that we were probably the first political movement to be organized as a swarm online. Nobody really met in person. The draft of the first program was all written in a forum, and the party stood for elections and did reasonably well as a new party, and then of course spawned this international movement. So that was sort of my start in understanding that there were new avenues for coordination that had not been possible before, that I had a feeling would change a lot. Fast forwarding a little bit, after I had been to university studying biotechnology, I ended up meeting some people who were really starting Cultural Center, which was based on participatory principles. And this was really overlapping with a community around a festival. And that festival was the Borderland. So I became involved with that community in 2015-16. And what I saw there, having been involved in this a bit from the political side and taking some time off of that to go do studies and do other things, and coming back here, was that I sort of realized that the real difficulty in doing these sort of swarm-based collaboration projects, where you're allowing for this sort of very free engagement, where people have a lot of autonomy, but still you're able to coordinate in this swarm-like fashion, it actually requires a lot of practice. It's not something that comes intuitively to most people. You need to go through periods of trial and failure. And society at large does not really offer that education. You don't really learn to operate in a swarm-like mindset in school, for example, and you certainly don't learn it in most workplaces. So the intuition I had there was that actually what's a really great way to teach people this sort of coordination mindset is to organize something that is low stakes, high rewards, and something that people still really care about. And the festival sort of hits all those marks, right? So really, where I started thinking about, the Borderland Festival and participatory culture and participatory art, as in and of itself, of course, just incredibly interesting and rewarding for people in many ways. But I also started thinking about it from the perspective of being experimental sandbox to try out these different coordination methods and see sort of how they work, how they don't work, and the scale at which some of these events are happening. Like, there's thousands of people, so it's not just 20 or 100 people. It means that you actually can try it out in a context where everyone doesn't know each other, and that's when coordination, of course, is theoretically very difficult. And the Borderland is really that sandbox within which I've been doing these experiments since 2015-16. Of course, I say me, but it's literally thousands of people who've been engaged in this. Later on, through these experiments, we built a few digital tools or platforms. One of those platforms is called now Cobudget because it merged with another platform that used to be called Dreams, and that's for participatory budgeting and project coordination. And then a few years after that, I became really interested in understanding, if we can make decisions about money with these coordination tools, how can we also create tools that give access to that money with more autonomy so you don't have to go through a bottleneck? And of course, that's where, the Web3 environment is fantastic. But the fact is that, most of the participants of something like the Borderland, they don't know Web3. They don't really want to engage with Web3. It's too much of an overhead. And this is where Open Collective has really come in for me, which is the company and organization I work for today, which is really trying to take away those overheads and barriers to give people in collectives and communities direct access to the money that they are, a part of holding. I think that that's a pretty good lead up to why we're talking here today, and sort of covers a few of those milestones in my path so far.
Definitely. Yeah, so many threads to to pull on. Yeah, I would love to discuss further at some point about the Open Collective. And you already asked me previously, like what Web3 tools kind of fill the same purpose and how we could plug this in. So I have some ideas there, but I want to go back to the political party and starting there. Like what do you think was the biggest issue there, and like what are some of your biggest lessons?
Sure. So, you ask different people this question, they're going to give you a lot of different answers. For me, when the Swedish Pirate Party started, I think I was 16 years old. And to me, I'd been following the corners on the internet where people were talking about, what does the internet mean for things like copyright? What does it mean for freedom of information? How does it relate to open source? How does open source relate to how we, what the software that we're using today is? And I've been following those discussions sort of, from a distance, of course, being very young, not really directly engaging in it at the time. And then I saw just this announcement in one of those channels of like, hey, we're starting a political party. And I immediately jumped on it because I had this very strong sense that there was a revolution happening that was going to change everything, namely the internet. And the politicians at the time were seeing it as sort of just another technology, just something else that they sort of had to manage and control without really understanding how there's no way that they could actually do anything in the future without putting this right at the center of their thinking. So in the beginning, I would say that party, for me at least, was about trying to awaken that consciousness within the political system. More than for me, at least, it was about trying to get into actual power. For me, that wasn't like the primary goal, and I never actually thought that was going to be very likely. But I will say this also: there is something else that the Pirate Party has which most new political movements lack. And in fact, I would say even in the meta modern context, there have been political parties that have tried to be meta modern, like Alternative in Denmark, and what the Pirate Party has and many of those lack is a theory of how power is held and distributed, right? So, I mean, if you look at socialism and communism, it means that power lies in capital, and you need to control the flow of capital in order to have power in society, right? If you look at the green movement, it is rather about that. None of our other mechanisms for power will matter if we do not conserve our environment and create a place within which to wield that, right? And the pirates have basically at their core the intuition that information is the key in modern society. Information, and thus transparency of information, becomes then sort of the thing that they put above everything else. And having that sort of guiding principle as a political party, this idea that anchors you, that you always return to, what you know is sort of what it's all about, is incredibly important for the success and sort of staying power of a political movement. And the pirates have that, and that's something that definitely speaks in their favor.
It makes sense. And what's the later success of the Pirate Party been like? You said that they entered the elections, but then later you personally disengaged. But I assume party went on.
Yes. The Swedish Pirate Party, was the first of its kind. It had success in the first elections in that it became a talking point. But actually, 2 years later, the Swedish Pirate Party did get into the European Parliament. By that time, I disengaged for various reasons. There was no falling out or anything like that, but I had started doing other things. But then the Pirate Party became an international movement and has since been reconstituted in different countries, even though in Sweden it's a very marginal force at the moment with no representation. In Iceland, where I am currently, the Pirate Party is actually one of the 4 or 5 biggest parties. It is in parliament with a representation of about 10%. There are other countries in which the Pirate Party has been successful. Of course, in Czechia, the Pirate Party is the 3rd largest party in parliament. And in Germany, it has had some historical success. In Luxembourg, I think there is 1 or 2 parliamentarians. So it does survive. These different political parties in these different countries have different focuses, different agendas. But what I would say unites them all is this general idea, this anchor of that information and freedom of information is extremely vital and extremely important, and really what where power is held in modern society. So all of them are very pro-transparency, very much against surveillance, personal privacy and integrity, and so forth.
Got it. Yeah, I knew that part, but I didn't know that they were actually came together on the internet originally, and that they were like a more participative political party among the first of those. So that's cool. And then going forward to the Borderland. So yeah, for those who don't know it, what is the Borderland Festival?
So the Borderland, first of all, if anyone from the Borderland is listening, I should say that the Borderland does not want to be called a festival. It wants to be called an event. And this is simply for the reason that if people come to a festival, they expect stages and bands and hamburger vendors and buying beer and so forth. And Borderland has none of those things. It is simply this. It is a group of people who have decided that every year they want to gather. And how many people are invited to that gathering, when that gathering is, where that gathering is, what happens at that gathering, is all up to the participants themselves. There is no central organizing committee. There is no program. There is really not any one center of leadership. There are many centers of leadership, and they emerge and dissolve organically. And at the end of the day, if you just go to the Borderland. You need to first win a lottery, and if you win the lottery, it is then given as a possibility to you to get some budget from the organization's coffers to create the project that you want to bring to the Borderland, which can be anything from putting up a noodle stand where you offer free noodles to people, to building a large-scale temple structure that will stay on the event grounds for years. All of those things are available to you, and you can choose to do any of that scale, or you can choose to do absolutely nothing at all and just come and be among other people. It's between 10 days and a week. Happens actually right now in Sweden. I'm not going this year. I'm in Iceland this year, and unfortunately last year I also did not have the possibility to go. But what is interesting with it is I have been involved now quite some time in building the systems for it, and I still feel very much of a participant because I am still responsible for organizing the online spaces in which the project curation and co-creation and budgeting happens. So I am sort of, for the last 2 years, digital citizen of this event.
I love it. And then so people win the lottery, you said, and that's how they get the ticket, or then they get the opportunity to buy the ticket? Or
Yes, exactly. So you participate in the lottery. If you win the lottery, you get the opportunity to get a membership. It's not called a ticket, but a membership. The Borderland has its own words for everything. And you get the opportunity then to buy a membership for yourself plus one. Or rather, you can divert that invitation to somebody, but that person also needs to have a profile and be signed up and so forth. And you know what's more, of course, is that it's called a membership because it is a membership. Every year there is an annual general meeting, and the members are all invited. The public is also invited to attend this meeting. It happens online, and at that meeting, the future of the association is decided. It's a completely democratic structure at its core, but then the layers above that, the sort of actual layers where the decisions happen and actions are made, decisions are not made through a majority decision or voting. They're made through what's called an advice process, where everyone has the right to make any decision as long as they seek advice from their peers. And people do use this. And it is, I would say, amazingly functional for being an event of thousands of people. And one thing that is a testament to sort of the strength of this community is that a few years ago, when COVID hit, there was an idea that came up about whether or not we should reimburse the membership prices for the memberships that people had already bought for that year. And the idea was that people could choose whether or not they wanted to be reimbursed or not. And if they chose to not be reimbursed, their membership fee would go towards a seed capital to buy land. And after a few years of searching, the searching was also a completely decentralized process, with anyone in the community really having the autonomy and the right to go and represent the Borderland, speaking to landowners, negotiating, talking to municipalities and so forth. And after a while, a few good candidates were found. The Borderland participated in a few bids and eventually won one bid and bought land for about 1.2 million euros, which is quite a large swath of land. I don't remember exactly how large, 100 hectares maybe, in Sweden, where the event is now held.
And that was, you said, during COVID. So this is the first time that the event is happening there, or has it already happened?
No, it happened last year also. Yeah, Sweden did not have as long a lockdown situation, so no, it happened last year. But there was a hiatus, of course, in the first 2 COVID years.
Got it. Yeah, very exciting. And also love to hear that these other ways of, well, not even governing, but like operating, like in the Web3 DAO space, we tend to think like, everything needs to be voted on because that's how we make it the most decentralized, by having everybody vote on something. But in reality, like, yeah, this is not even it's not the best, not the most efficient, not even the most decentralized way. I think this is even more decentralized, where it's kind of a duocracy, where people get to do what they want to do. You just need to like seek advice first and integrate feedback in some way.
Yes, right. And I would say that is both the strength and the weakness of the way of working in this Web3 environment, because actually this Borderland setup and having this sort of organization, what it requires is a very high degree of trust, of course, and a real sense of that you know who the other people are within your organization. But I would argue that any DAO that is actually trying to coordinate towards a common goal needs to have a trust anyway. There is no such thing as completely trustless coordination towards a common goal, because as soon as you have that word common, you need to have trust in that your understanding of that common is the same as the other's understanding of that common.
Right. What would you say have been the biggest challenges to the Borderland in this way of operating?
The Borderland works remarkably well for what it is. It cannot be anything else than what it is. And let me explain what I mean there. So, a great strength of the Borderland is that a lot of what happens is a bit amateurish, to be honest. It's very participatory in the sense of that, it's hacked together. I mean, when you're there, everything feels very, very immersive and strong, right? But if you take most of the components of the things that are built at the Borderland and you would take them out into some other context, for example, to be displayed in a gallery or something like that, it would not be particularly impressive, because it is really the sum of all of those parts that make it such an amazing experience and creates the magic in it. So I guess that a weakness? No, not really, because that's not what it's not supposed to be. A producer of things that should be enjoyed elsewhere. Another thing that I would say is challenge of these sorts of organizations is that when you have this sort of decision making, it's beneficial if you have low stakes or reasonably low stakes, because at the end of the day, what will happen is that a lot of things that are potentially quite important will either not be done at all because nobody just does them, or they will be done last minute, right? So examples of this could be last year, there was dealing with the toilets was not done in time. So at the time when it was decided that the event would happen, which was procrastinated because nobody really dealt with putting the event together and getting the ball rolling, at the time that the ball actually started rolling, it was too late to order toilets from the suppliers because they had already booked up by other events. So then what do? Well, you try your best, and they built some toilets that were the best they could do at the time, but it really wasn't good, and then it was a pretty dissatisfactory solution for the people at the event, and caused some conflicts. Now, could that have been done differently? Yes, with more foresight. If there would have been a centralized committee and they knew that the event was going to happen in July, and there was a person who was responsible for organizing the toilets, and they had been chosen to be that person a year in advance, then they would have started getting the ball rolling and done everything that needed to be done. Now, does this really matter for the Borderland? Not really. I mean, people could go to their toilets, and it's amazing that the community solved it as well as it did. I mean, they literally built toilets and went and carried buckets all week to make sure that it worked. So this is an example of how, if you have higher stakes, say if you're not organizing a festival, but you're organizing, say, a field hospital, of course, this is not acceptable, right? If you're organizing a disaster relief, it is not acceptable that you don't have your logistics in order. So I would say that this way of organizing is particularly good when the stakes are reasonably low, the engagement is high, And you also know that there's not going to be a whole lot of things that can happen that would be existential threats to the organization if they're not responded to immediately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. And then are there people like in some like, I mean, there are obviously higher responsibility roles as well. How does that work? I saw that you have some like supervisor roles. So like the most important roles have somebody who checks on the person who is supposed to do it or something like that.
Yes, exactly. This has evolved a bit over the years. We built a system that's called realities. So the Borderland stands for the borderland between dreams and realities. And the dreams are the projects that people want to do. We call it the dream funding process, where people, can co-create and fund their projects. And then they also, by the way, they distribute the funding to those projects in a participatory manner on the Dreams platform. The realities system is, on the other hand, all the things that need to be in place for the event to happen. Everything from toilets to the membership system to parking to you name it, right? And being responsible for an area of realities. When you are that, you're called a realizer, and a realizer is supposed to have to support them a guide. And the guide is somebody who is not doing the thing, but knows how the thing is done, right? So it is their job then, the guide, for example, if somebody, quits the organization suddenly and is not available, then the guide is there as sort of a backup to be able to at least help recruit someone new into this role. But the recruiting, of course, is completely self-appointed. There's nobody who goes around and actively, interviews and recruits people. People have to just find their way into the responsibility that they think that they can shoulder. And all of this happens really on a variety of online platforms. There's a huge Facebook group, but that's mostly for just chatter. There's a Lumio forum, there's a Discord server, and then there's, of course, all of the private chats. So yes, people do have responsibilities. I will also say that since the land was bought, there has been a bit of a shift, because a lot of the most important responsibilities used to be dealing with and negotiating with and talking to the landowners, making sure that we were living up to the requirements that they had. Now we don't have that problem anymore, because the community owns its own land, right? So, of course, the land requires more ongoing upkeep, and there are people who are responsible for the land, and there are people who are, sort of the caretakers and custodians of various parts of that. And of course, that offloads some responsibility from the event. But yeah, in essence, it's the same people. But it's very organic. People would say flow in and out of responsibilities a lot.
Got it. So then, going on to the Open Collective. So you said that you were building a bunch of things for the Borderland, and then one of these pieces were merged with another project that was from outside Borderland, or it was Open Budget, Open Collective.
Cobudget. So what happened was, we wanted to build a platform on which people could go create their projects and have other people join their projects, and then use that platform to distribute the funding to those projects. So we built our own little hacky, Ruby on Rails web app a few years ago. Over time, others wanted to start using it. This little hacky side project called Dreams was adopted at other festivals, among others in Israel. And they then expanded on the code, which I had put up on GitHub, and they really rewrote about 70% of the code. They had a very great IT team. So the next year that I wanted to use it, this was in 2017, the next year when the Borderland was going to use its own platform that it had built itself, the platform had been vastly improved by the team at the other festival. So we had that for free, and that's really when I started understanding that there is there is something here in this idea. So we were able to secure a bit of funding from some very innovative platform funders in Sweden. And we built the first versions of something that would be, not a single instance hacky tool that you need to deploy yourself, but something more of a service. And while we were building that service for people to be able to use, I ran into, through a network I'm participating in, a woman called Francesca Pick. And she was currently the custodian of a platform called Cobudget. Now, Cobudget had arisen to solve basically the same problem, which is how do you participate in a participatory way, decide what gets funded in a community. But Cobudget had arisen not from a festival setting, but from sort of a workers' cooperative setting called Inspiral in New Zealand. That tool was getting outdated in terms of the code, but they had much better brand, they had a better name, and they also had documentation, which we really didn't have. So we just decided to merge. We took the code that we had been developing and the name and the sort of documentation and the process that they had, and merged it. And since then, we've been operating under a common name, and this platform is now called Cobudget, and it's used. The biggest use cases are these participatory festivals. Those are the largest users, but then there are a lot of smaller organizations, or actually the organizations themselves can be bigger, like the WWF, for example, but their funding rounds on it are smaller, and they use it, for example, for funding climate initiatives in Switzerland. It's used for sort of interior prioritization of what to fund of some cooperatives. Some little collectives use it basically to manage their shared money that they invest in their own little projects. So it's available online at cobudget.com. It's basically free right now, although we need to understand how to make it sustainable. Everyone's free to come use it. And it's also, of course, open source still, and can be self-deployed.
Very cool. And then I assume we also don't use like a quote-unquote traditional voting system. So I'm interested in knowing like how do people decide how to spend the budget and allocate money on the Cobudget?
In Cobudget, it's actually extremely simple. There are no votes. There is no fancy algorithm. You just get some money, and then you put the money in the project's budget. You have a quote-unquote wallet, but of course that's not representative of any real money. It's not tied to a treasury or anything like that. It's just a number in a database, really. But that's what we found to be the most straightforward way to do this. And the way the platform looks is basically quite similar to Kickstarter. People set up descriptions for their projects. They set up, compared to Kickstarter, we expect people to set up more detailed budgets, saying what they will use their money for. They can set up a stretch goal, also then describing what will they do if they get the stretch goal funding. Put up some pictures and some information, and add the co-creators. And then, of course, we have a comment section where people are discussing, in the ideal world, people will help each other improve the projects before the projects go to funding. But then the way it works is really just that participants in the community all can get money allocated to them that they can then choose what to spend it on. Some communities like the Borderland do it completely flat, so everyone gets the same amount. In other communities, there will be a committee, and they really just use the platform for the committee's decisions to be transparent. And other communities have a mix, so they might give some money that's split between everyone, but then a large chunk of money is given to a committee that has much more money to distribute. Sometimes, the committee will actually be, maybe 5 different people who all get an equal split of the committee's pot. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And then you'll have, at the end of this process, what do you do when things are not funded, right? So if something just gets a partial way to its funding, the way that we do it then usually is we will just rank all the projects in order of how close they are to reaching their goal. And then at the end of the funding round, most of the time we'll do some version of removing the funds from the project that is furthest from its goal and giving that funding to the project that is closest to its goal, and that is running through that algorithm to sort of solve the locks in the end. And I'll also say that it can often be beneficial to have that process being done by a committee and to allow that committee to make adjustments to the algorithm and not just completely follow it algorithmically, but maybe they will see a project that doesn't quite make it if you just follow the algorithm, but they can actually then make the decision to give it some extra priority.
Got it. And you said the rounds are organized by different projects or organizations who are using the platform?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then the grants are like, or not the grants, but like the project pages are more so outward facing for raising money, like on Kickstarter, like you said. It's so the decision mostly happens outside the platform, like in these committees. I mean, the funding decision, like after they gather the funding.
You mean is the funding decision? Can you explain what you mean?
The funding decision, like after a project has raised money through the platform, then the actual like allocation process is decided by the organization, like outside of the platform. There isn't like, it's not facilitated through the platform.
Oh, you mean how the money is moved? You mean?
Right, what it's allocated to.
Yes, what the money is allocated to, that's decided by the budget. So the projects usually have to specify a budget that is quite detailed. It will say we need 1,000 euros for wood, we need some amount for something else. So they're expected to follow the budget they set up. But then how the money is moved, that's something we've now started using Open Collective for. So it might be a segue into that once you have your decision and the decision has been made on Cobudget of what to spend the money on, the money can then be spent through Open Collective, which you could sort of think of as the treasury, but in fiat, right? So Open Collective is just an interface that lies on top of common payment solutions in the Web 2 world, like Wise and Stripe and PayPal and so forth. And it just shows the collective's balance. And you can submit invoices and expenses on Open Collective and get paid as a private person or as a company. And the way we combine these things is that we've built an integration between Cobudget and Open Collective so that you can go on Cobudget and submit your expenses that then end up in Open Collective, and thus we know how much of a budget has been spent, right? How much of a funded project's budget has already been spent, because we can keep track of how much has been paid out through Open Collective with this integration.
Got it. Cool, that makes sense. Yeah, I was going to ask, like, where does the Open Collective fit in? Because I'm pretty sure you mentioned it before, but I didn't remember that, like, in what context exactly. And then, going on to civil society and DAOs. So there was your proposed topic for MetaFest. So kind of, I guess, taking learnings from all of you've been working on for the past many years. Well, since you were 16 and participating in the Pirate Party. So yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Like, what were your thoughts there?
So my thoughts there have been that I feel that the Web3 community and especially those in the region space should be looking more closely at the formation and history of civil society organizations and associations in Europe. And what I'm specifically talking about is that in the early 20th century, workers started organizing. And I mean, we often think of this is being only connected to labor unions. And of course, labor unions were a very important part of this. But what's often forgotten, I think, when people think about this without knowing a lot of the history, is that labor unions were just one part of what the workers were doing in order to sort of regain autonomy for themselves. A lot of what they did was to actually build democratic, participatory, co-owned organizations that would own hospitals, they would build apartment buildings, they would also do more mundane things like running like sports clubs and associations, or gyms and so forth. And at least in northwestern Europe, and particularly in Scandinavia, a lot of the existing infrastructure in these senses, including large real estate developers, the largest gym in Sweden, even companies that you don't understand are actually worker-run associations, are still these cooperatives. So what that tells me is that on top of a sort of a very, very, really informal civil society layer, because it was really, compared to the alternative at the time, this was very decentralized. On top of such a structure, it has been possible to form extremely long living, sustainable, resilient, large organizations that have survived, right? So the issues that are currently being discussed a lot in the Web3 world, specifically around, how do you create sound governance in these communities and these organizations? A lot of those problems were essentially already solved almost 100 years ago by these associations and have then been iterated on. But I think the reason for why, I don't know actually what the reason is for why there is not more learning going on in trying to build these governance DAOs. I can take one example. A few months ago, I spoke to somebody who was involved in that wasn't a DAO even, that was an open source project. And that open source project was quite large. And they had run into this situation of, now they had one board that was an executive board, and then they had one board that was the strategic board, and there were supposed to be some checks and balances. And then they had some sort of assembly, and they needed to figure out, like, okay, who elects these different boards, and through what mechanism? And I was hearing him talk about this, and I realized that in a lot of these communities that are running, open source software or DAOs or Web3s, there's not a single person that has any experience from regular civil society organizations, because if they did, they would already have the blueprints in their heads of how this can look, because the blueprints are already there and they're stable and they work, right? So I'm very interested in understanding if we can set up some sort of learning program where we come to terms with that we don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to governance. And there are a lot of things we can learn.
Right. Yeah, very well said. I would actually love to collaborate with you on this. This is a super important topic, and I will be focusing on DAO content right after MetaFest. So I think this is definitely something that we should continue talking about.
Great, love it.
And I definitely agree with you there, because a lot of people in the DAO space are reinventing the wheel, and a lot of DAOs are actually not even reinventing decentralized organizations, but like shareholder capitalism, where just people vote with shares. And then you have people who are like, oh yeah, this is the first time ever that we can build decentralized organizations. But it's like, no, like decentralized organizations have existed probably even longer than centralized ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but then how do you see this going the other way around? So the DAO space should take lessons from the civil society, and then how could is there anything the civil society could take from the DAO space?
Yes, but it won't until the DAO space starts making a difference in the physical world. And I think for good reason in some way, right? when these organizations were started, these civil society organizations, they were really very experimental and trying to find their way in the face of a lot of resistance from the from the powers that be at the time. I mean, they were really doing things in a very rebellious sort of, outside of the established system sort of way. And now the tables are turned a little bit, and I think that the civil society organizations, a lot of them that I think could benefit from more swarm sort of thinking, a more nimble, agile approach that also leverages the benefits of being able to use these sort of trustless systems when you need them, and hybridize that with this more like human interaction. There's an extremely high potential there, but I don't think it's going to come to fruition before the DAO ecosystem proves itself as being capable of doing something in the physical world that engages with people in the day-to-day. I think a lot of these civil society organizations, if we recall, I mean, they come from really a sort of worker-oriented background, right? It's like people's movements. And at the moment, the Web3 space it doesn't want to be elitist, but it is. It is technocratically elitist because it has not yet been able to find a way in which it can, in a satisfactory manner, interface with 99% of people. So that's something we sort of need to solve first, I think. One way of solving that could be for those of us that are in between these worlds to think long and hard about, are there any problems that civil society has that we could just build solutions for within the Web3 space, and then try to find the right organizations to adopt it, or even potentially build our own civil society organizations in the regular legal framework ecosystem, and have those hybridize with our own DAOs and build our own hybrid organizations that stand in both worlds. And those, of course, would be very small compared to the very large, impactful civil society organizations at first. But if we can show that we can leverage that sort of hybrid approach, then that's much more likely than to be invited to the table to discuss also with the behemoths, if you will.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, right now there's a huge disconnect, and a lot of people in the Web3 space are kind of like building things without interfacing a lot with the real world. And then they're like, hey, real world, you want to take these solutions? And the real world is like, no, this is useless to us. You should have asked us before you built it.
Yes, and they're right. Most of the time, it is useless to them. They're like, yeah, you're trying to solve a problem that we don't really have. Yeah.
All right. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
Look, man, I'm just very happy to have this conversation. I love these that you're doing this, that there's a community around this. I've wanted to engage a bit more with metagame and this overlapping communities. I mean, the meta modern school of thought. I think if you ask Daniel, I think he will probably agree that the first places where it gained some traction was in Stockholm and in Denmark, probably around Aarhus and Copenhagen. So I mean, we've been. I remember seeing the Hansi Freinach books in preprint, lying around in the spaces where we were hanging out in. I don't remember really, 2017 maybe they started showing up. So we've sort of lived with this for a long time, and it's now interesting to see how this the meta modern idea has now started merging with the Web3 world in a very interesting way. So I'm following that with great interest.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. And thank you for coming on. This was great.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Talk to you soon.